Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed the Space Warfighters Luncheon, and again, we would like to thank Analytical Graphics. The past several years have seen an increasing reliance on the use of space assets in disaster management and prevention. Last evening, the Space Foundation recognized NOAA with the Space Achievement Award for their efforts in this arena. But achievement in this field is both widespread and critical. To discuss Space and Satcom, Redefining Disaster Management, the Foundation is pleased to partner with our friends and colleagues at Euroconsult. To moderate this panel, we are pleased to welcome Ms. Susan Irwin, President of Euroconsult USA. Susan, we look forward to your panel.
Thank you, and thank you to the Space Foundation for inviting me to another wonderful National Space Symposium. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon, and excuse me. And I'm especially delighted because this is the first time that the National Space Symposium has addressed the topic of disaster management. I'm certain, however, that it will not be the last time. Though natural and man-made disasters are not new, they are increasing in number. In fact, there's been an exponential increase in disasters for a variety of reasons that we're not going to go into in this panel. And it's become clear that the efforts to prepare for, respond to, recover from, and reconstruct the damage is an effort that requires a huge array of and cooperative ventures that involve public, private, and multinational organizations. The communications efforts that are needed throughout a disaster from the very beginning are absolutely critical, and the advances that have been made in information technologies, in a whole range of information technologies, are making it possible to mitigate against at least some of the devastating results of disasters. First responders need to establish communications instantly and throughout and after the disaster. Instant communications networks need to be set up. The terrestrial infrastructures that provide telephone, data, and television communications are often the first to go. And the worse the disaster, the more likely it is that the terrestrial infrastructure is not working. Whether it was Hurricane Sandy in New York last year, the tsunami in Japan, the earthquake in Haiti, or countless other disasters, not to mention 9/11, all required extraordinary efforts to establish communications. Satellite communications have played a major and critical role in every one of these events. If governments can work together with private industry and take advantage of the extraordinary innovations that are being developed in satellite and space-based communications, mobile, ViaSat, broadband, and imaging, countless lives can be saved, and tragedies can be mitigated in future disasters. We have a panel of experts today representing the major links in the value chain of disaster management. And I'm so grateful to have them here today to share with us their experience, their knowledge, and their forward-thinking innovations. I'd like to introduce my panelists. On my right is Jeff Tarr, Chief Executive Officer of DigitalGlobe. Jeff previously served as President and Chief Operating Officer of IHS Inc., was Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Hoover's, and was Vice President and General Manager of US West. On my immediate right is Major Linda Bozada. Major Bozada is the Satellite Communications Chief for Plans and Programs of the US Pacific Command at Camp H.M. Smith in Hawaii. She previously served as a Satcom Projects Officer and the Exercises and Plans Branch Chief of U.S. Army Space and Missile Defense Command. She served as the lead project officer for all communications infrastructure projects throughout Afghanistan, and served as the communications subject matter expert on the Army's Future Combat Systems Program of Record for the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command's Capability Manager. On my left is Matt Desch. Matt is Chief Executive Officer of Iridium Communications, with more than 30 years of experience in telecommunications management and over 19 years in the global wireless industry. He previously served as Chief Executive Officer of New Jersey-based Telcordia Technologies, a supplier of software and services to the telecommunications industry, and was president of Nortel's fast-growing wireless networks division and held senior management roles at Nortel. All the way on my left is Bill Connelly. Bill is Vice President and General Manager for Tactical Satcom Networks at ViaSat Inc. Previously, he managed proprietary programs at Boeing's S&IS segment, Network-Enabled Solutions for Boeing's Homeland Security Unit, and Boeing Digital Cinema, and also held senior roles at Hughes Aircraft Company and General Electric Company. So we've got a great array of experts here to talk about disaster management, and I'd like to start out by giving each of our panelists an opportunity to tell us a little bit about how their organization is positioned to play a role in disaster management. And I'd like to start with Jeff Tarr of DigitalGlobe.
Thanks,
Jeff?
Susan. It can happen anywhere. Less than a year ago, less than 7 miles from where we all sit today, the Waldo Canyon fire destroyed more than 341 homes, destroyed nearly 30,000 square miles, required 32,000 evacuations. If we were sitting here in June of last year, this would have been top of mind for all of us, much more so than the weather outside. Whenever there's a natural disaster, our business at DigitalGlobe jumps into action with our primary customer in the US government, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA. In this particular case, in Colorado Springs last year, the first thing that we do is get a snapshot of the area and provide situational awareness. If we have any kind of notice, and a fire which typically starts small and then grows is one of those examples where we can do work in advance, we'll capture baseline imagery of the situation before the disaster occurs. And that is often, if not hours, just days before it's actually required for the disaster response. We support decision making. How effective was the retardant drop? Where should those fire breaks, the bulldozer lines, be placed? And we've done this for almost every major disaster in recent years. Last year, more than 80 natural and man-made disasters. I'll just click through a few of these so you can get a sense. Some of these were more than a year ago. We're able to do this because of the Enhanced View program with NGA. And also, we'll often go above and beyond the requirements of our program. In fact, whenever it's asked, even when it's not asked, we'll jump into action. The purpose of our company is seeing a better world. And so I hope we'll get a chance to talk about this, that human desire to respond to natural disasters and help others. And that's where we get a lot of our energy to do everything that we do, is that desire to help and make a difference.
Thank you, Jeff. We're looking forward to hearing more about the role of imaging and DigitalGlobe.
Thank you.
Major Bozada, can you tell us a little bit about the Pacific Command and what role it plays?
Sure. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm serving in a unique position at United States Pacific Command. Unique because as a soldier and a signal officer, I'm not a space functional area soldier, but I've seemed to grow into a Satcom SME. So I've been entrusted with leading the Satcom planning across the entire theater for PACOM's O plans, COM plans, and contingency operations for over 4 years. As you see the PACOM AOR map, it encompasses about half the Earth's surface. This large expanse encompasses 36 countries and poses a challenge to providing communications to all of our military forces, as well as responding to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief efforts. I've heard comments before about, well, PACOM being mostly water, and exactly, we're mostly water. When was the last time you saw a ship with a fiber optic cable off its hull? Staying involved in programs at the space, ground, and terminal segments ensures that the PACOM warfighters will have those resources available when needed to execute their missions, whether planned or unplanned. I serve in a geographic combatant command where threats are real from both our adversaries and Mother Nature.
Thank you, Major. I'm particularly grateful to Major Bozada for being here. First of all, she is our one first responder on the panel. She's also come from beautiful Hawaii to cold, windy Colorado Springs. And as you know, it's not easy these days for military to travel. So thank you, Major.
Yeah, thanks.
I'd like now to ask Matt Desch to tell us the role that Iridium plays in disaster management. Matt?
Thanks, Susan, and thanks for inviting me. Great to be here. Let me just give you a quick overview of Iridium. I think many of you know of us. We've been around about 13 years now. We're obviously been heavily involved in the support of things like disasters, but we are a much larger enterprise in operation than that. You see our network there, which is quite unique. 66 low Earth orbiting satellites, all interconnected in space, providing the only truly global network. And we use that to support many, many active customers, over 600,000 now at the end of last year. You know us as a handset, which of course is used in disasters and many other places and for remote workers and people on the go. But more and more, we're on ships, we're on airplanes, we're installed in cockpits. We're used by the government in many different applications, including tactical radios. We're used extensively in tracking applications, unattended sensors, all kinds of little devices to find out and control assets anywhere in the world. We're profitable. We're building a new network. It launches in less than 2 years, in February of 2015. We'll replace that complete network with a brand new network that not only does what it does, but provides higher data speeds and some innovative new services that I think some of you have heard about, like hosted payloads and other things. So that's who we are. Just where we fit in this panel discussion quickly, I'd say that there's kind of 8 areas in which, if you think about emergency communications as a sequence of events, starting with a warning, if you have it, a disaster warning. You typically could have an evacuation if you have notice, and then the disaster will strike, sometimes unexpectedly, but sometimes expected in the case of, say, a hurricane. You have first responders, then you have search and rescue, disaster assessment, reinforcements arrive, and things get back to normal in some sort of cleanup. And mobile satellite services, the area we play is in that sort of second, number 2 through number 5 area, really in the early stages of a disaster, typically in the first couple days before high-speed satellite is rolled in, or other kinds of communications. We're the ones that perhaps are the only things that work. So just to give you an example, just took a couple high-profile ones in the last couple years, going back all the way to Hurricane Katrina, which I think was, a wake-up for a lot of people about the fragility of ground-based infrastructure, where literally we were the only thing that worked for, a few hundred miles around New Orleans. And you could see our traffic spike in that case was 12 times normal, but it lasted really for almost 6 to 7 weeks before floods resided and people could get infrastructure back. Sometimes it goes faster. Haiti was getting back to normal after 20 days, back to normal from our perspective, but of course still was not back to normal yet still at Haiti, but other solutions were able to be rolled in, cell towers were able to be put back online. Gulf oil spill did raise you could call that a disaster. Libya uprising, certainly unexpected, went on for a long time, 9 months with a lot of traffic. The Japan earthquake was a big spike over about 32 days for us. So you can see we're used in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different times, depending upon the disaster. Finally, just one chart I thought I'd bring to show. This is just an example kind of before and after. You see the 28th of October, and that's a 10-state region around New Jersey and New York for Hurricane Sandy. And then where it was, and I doubt you can see it real well, but you can see our traffic really bloomed over a couple days, really, 3 to 4 times, really, the traffic spike over that time as first responders and individuals got active. And I think it just goes to show that this isn't just about Haiti and unproven places in the world. This is about highly built-out infrastructure is fragile and needs solutions for disaster management. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Bill, where does ViaSat fit?
Good afternoon, and thanks to the Space Foundation and to Susan Irwin here for moderating for us, for the opportunity to speak today. I think the panel members will have some great anecdotes about the growing role of Satcom and how it will play in disaster recovery operations. Do I have my charts? My charts are not.
You can do my charts.
I may have to go without my charts. Okay, so my first chart was basically a set of motherhood that discussed. Oh, there we go.
They're working it.
We'll give them a second to put it up. Can you go to the first chart, please? There we go. Basically, the message I want to convey here today is that Satcom is no longer the communications link of last resort. The inset in there is from the FCC, First Responders Guide. It basically talks about when the terrestrial infrastructure is damaged, satellites give you interoperability. We're going to go beyond that. Next chart, please. Satellites have actually, with the advent of the high-capacity satellites, these satellites are now very fast. News gathering is already working on this. As you can see on the right side, that's a KPIX weather station truck. They go out on the road, do live HD telecasts of weather operations in the San Francisco area. On the left side is a CBS truck, or I'm sorry, an ABC truck in Chicago. So they've been operating it through the winter to get characterization data on the system. And these are all KA systems now with very high throughput. The ABC system typically runs 7 to 15 megabits. On the lower right, that's a command post tent for a military operation. They're running high definition video, and they had 40 laptops hooked up at the same time, running through a 75 centimeter aperture. The one on the lower right is a facility that was set up in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, and rather than running a bunch of T1 lines into the facility, it didn't have adequate capacity. They just threw up some Ka-band satellite links. Whoops. I think well, now I've done it. Can I go back? Sorry there. Okay, there we go. So I guess I was on the right one. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the transportability of these new systems. They're highly mobile. They can be helicoptered in. They can be man-packed in. The apertures are very small. The systems are very portable. As you can see on the right side there, they have to put cones up because people actually walk into the antennas. They don't even see them. At the lower left is the American Red Cross in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy setting up a system. What was interesting about that one was the operators had never seen the equipment before. I can talk more about that later perhaps, but they were able to get it up and operational. And then finally, the capacity on these systems is extraordinary. We have a lot of spot beams that provide a tremendous amount of throughput. On the left side there, that is actually a FEMA station that was set up in the aftermath of Sandy. Unfortunately, FEMA requires that you go online to submit your needs for emergency care, and most of the folks who were most seriously affected had no way to get to the internet. So we set up some systems in facilities nearby, and people actually walked up and used it as an internet cafe, basically, to log into FEMA so that they could put in their request for aid. The center picture is an interesting situation. That was the G8 summit in Chicago. The protesters were out in the street, and they had actually jammed all of the cellular networks with all the traffic that was going on. The only way they could get the telecast out was through satellite. So even in non-disaster events, a lot of times it's terrestrial communications that cannot be relied on. On the right is a demonstration that we did in Germany. There was a 2.4 meter dish there, as you can see, operating at about 2 megabits. The little dish off to the side there was actually running at 20 megabits. So basically, what I want you to think about is not so much what satellite has been able to do for you, but what it can do. And with the mobility, with the small size, with the portability, with the relatively low cost, the capital cost is quite low on these systems. There's tremendous advantages, and it's no longer the system of last resort.
Thank you, Bill. Bill, do you want to give us an example of one particular disaster that ViaSat's played a role in, and how that went?
Sure. One of the great examples I think we have is the American Red Cross after Hurricane Sandy. We had just negotiated a service contract with the national branch of the American Red Cross, and they had established a holding center down in Texas for their systems. We supplied them about 100 terminals. They hadn't been able to conduct any training with the local branches of the Red Cross. So when Sandy hit, they just shipped a number of units out through the 5-state area that was affected by Sandy. And the operators basically had to figure out how to operate the systems without any significant training. It was very successful. We got the systems up and running. We learned a lot from our users, however, in terms of making the equipment easier to use, easier to set up, training aids, and that sort of thing. And we're still working with the Red Cross on that. In addition to that, the New York National Guard used the system. That was extremely successful. They're more adept at using satellite networks. And one of the other unforeseen opportunities was the retailers in the New York City downtown area lost terrestrial communication. And those are the hubs for many of their supply chain and purchasing activities. And so in a matter of a day, we put a number of satellite systems into the retail organizations in New York City to get them back online.
Thanks, Bill. Matt, do you have one particular example you want to describe for us?
Yeah, I think a good one would be the Japan tsunami. More in that it describes sort of how we, when you say disaster management, we're obviously not doing the work ourselves because our business model is to be a supplier of a signal to what is now hundreds and hundreds of partners who take our technology and package it into technology solutions and deliver it out to the market. In the case of Japan, there's a number of them, but KDDI is one of the key telephone companies. They deploy our services, as do a number of others. But what is different about Japan than, say, Katrina was the variety of solutions in which satellite was used for. So Katrina might have been for voice coordination and people were using it, but by the time you get to Japan, the tsunami buoys that actually warned of a tsunami were satellite-based. The first responders, of course, had service, but they were now using tactical radio-type service. The DoD was involved in providing satellite services. But then we were having the helicopters were being tracked, the ones that were monitoring the radiation, they were being tracked in real time. Radiation sensors were satellite-based. Again, you couldn't depend upon the terrestrial infrastructure for such an important function. So it's just a wide variety of things that in current disasters, you're just finding, because of the cost and because of the variety of solutions that have been created, you know, we're getting used a lot more.
Thanks, Matt. Major Bozada, can you tell us about an experience that you've had in a disaster management situation?
Sure. It's already been touched on a few times, but as you know, on March 11, 2011, the 9.0 earthquake hit off the Japanese island of Honshu. The earthquake was so powerful that it moved Honshu approximately 8 feet and shifted the Earth on its axis an estimated of 4 to 10 inches. This, of course, resulted in the deadly tsunami. US PACOM was tasked to provide 3 lines of operations: HADR, military and voluntary assisted departure operations, and consequence management capabilities to US Forces Japan. It was codenamed Operation Tomodachi. I deployed to Japan as the PACOM J6 liaison officer to US Forces Japan and JTF 519, which JTF 519 was PAC fleet forces that deployed there as well. The undersea cables were so disrupted and the Fukushima nuclear plant disaster was occurring. The devastation was so widespread across Japan that the efforts were immediately important to get there. The US service members, we worked jointly with US Forces Japan, the Japanese Self-Defense Force, and we worked around the clock. The Sendai Airport, which was approximately 200 miles northeast of Tokyo, was riddled with hundreds of vehicles and airplanes from the tsunami water flooding. With terrestrial communications disrupted, we had to figure out a way to support the troops that were deploying north into the Sendai region. In addition to using military Satcom, my team back at PACOM headquarters coordinated with DISA to obtain Iridium's Distributed Tactical Communications System, the DTCS. It's a push-to-talk handheld terminal. And we were able to get those terminals shipped out to Japan, and so we gave them to the forces that were headed north into the more tenuous area. Providing that Satcom reach-back support is critical in supporting HADR operations, not only for the military, but also for the non-government organizations and emergency response personnel. In the Asia-Pacific region, it's not if there's another disaster, it's when the next disaster will hit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know how many of you know that our military plays such an extraordinary role in international disasters, but it's pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Jeff, you mentioned an example of DigitalGlobe's involvement in disaster. Do you want to elaborate?
Sure. I think when I think about case studies, for me, one that's salient is actually the sheer volume and frequency of responses to natural disasters. Right now, just in the past week, we've responded to 3. Actually, one's a preparation, and 2, there's flooding right now in Yemen and in Argentina. And there's preparations going underway in the upper Midwest where there's a greater risk of springtime flooding. So we're doing some preparation work there. It's the sheer number. 78, we responded to 78 natural disasters and 8 man-made disasters in the last year alone.
Thank you, Jeff. 3 of the 4 of you are service providers, and I'd like to ask you how you differentiate the services that you provide, your response solutions, from other solutions. Matt, how about Iridium?
Well, I mean, we're a unique system, so we don't really, we're not like too much of anybody else because we really do operate on a global basis. As I said, we provide a network, but the solutions are really come from partners, and so whether it's a point-to-point connection or a point-to-multipoint, say a netted tactical radio kind of connection, tracking services, all those things, more and more solutions have been created on top of that, and I really think that you know, the next thing kind of coming for us is actually public safety-based systems. So we're starting to get integrated now into true public safety systems, standard-based public safety. I think you'll see that next year and the year after, where we're just another part of basically a terrestrial solution, so that there's that always on and always available kind of connection.
There is a terrestrial solution that's being developed by the U.S. in the U.S. or globally, and do satellites play a role in that? That's called FirstNet, right?
Yeah, no, FirstNet is the dream of really, especially in the U.S., for a first responder system. Remember, after Katrina, the big complaint was nobody were able to talk to each other because of interoperability issues. Right. Mm-hmm. We still don't have interoperability, and there's a lot more reasons besides technology as to reasons for that. But the government has allocated some money. I don't know whether that money will be there. There is an organization, there is Spectrum that's being set up. There's still a lot of questions about how it will operate, but you know, Hurricane Sandy, I think, as we've talked a couple times, demonstrates that you can build an LTE-based network that allows these real-time pictures to be sent around so that people can see the disaster in real time, and then it all blows down, and it's not very usable in a disaster. So satellites got to be a part of it, is our message.
Bill, how does ViaSat differentiate itself as a solutions provider?
Sure. We don't differentiate per se. We have service level agreements with our partners and users. And we can, the one thing we don't do is we don't allocate bandwidth, because that's basically not the constraining factor anymore. So we'll typically work on packages that provide so many gigabits per month, and we can set up the service level agreement to handle situations of overage and surge. And so typically that's all pre-negotiated in the agreements.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, with the recent merger of DigitalGlobe and GOI, you've eliminated your primary competitor, but you do have other competitors, and I know that DigitalGlobe or remote imaging plays a unique role in disaster management. But how do you differentiate your solutions?
Sure, and I'd be remiss in not emphasizing that we do have many competitors. But with that aside, we differentiate ourselves when it comes in the area of speed, resolution, and shareability when it comes to disaster response. We have 5 high-resolution Earth observation satellites and a ground network of 11 regional ground terminals close to the poles and around the equator, which allows us to be extremely responsive. About 2 hours from tasking to the warfighter of or the first responder of processed orthode imagery. We do a lot of that work on the fly. It's highly automated, and ultimately it is shareable. I was actually talking with with Marty Fega, who led the NRO, as many of you know, about 1992, Hurricane Andrew. And at that time, the NRO got a call from Dade County asking for imagery, and it couldn't be provided. Now, things have changed. One of the big things that's changed is the availability of high-resolution, timely, accurate commercial imagery, and we're proud to play a role now to make sure that never happens again with our partners at the NGA.
Along those same lines, what about the information sharing that goes on in the aftermath of a disaster? How do you deal with that?
Well, there's a huge amount of information sharing. We actually there's some new technology also that's enabling that. We just announced today the acquisition of TomNod, which is a crowdsourcing platform. And what we do is, with TomNod, is we take imagery in the immediate aftermath of a disaster, and we put it out online to a community of both volunteer and professional imagery analysts. Very little skill is required. In the case of Hurricane Sandy, for example, we had hundreds of volunteers who were identifying in the imagery flooding, road debris, damaged buildings, and that way it's the areas, just the areas of interest that then can be downloaded as very small files on handhelds held by first responders. We share very openly. When it comes to natural disasters, this isn't about charging a customer. This is about helping people in need, and the whole community jumps into action when people are in need.
And has to.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I want to take one of the questions from the audience, and this question is clearly directed at you, Major Bozada. What organizations does the military typically interface with when responding to natural disasters in the Pacific? And how do these activities relate to other concerns at PACOM?
Sure. In the Pacific, you know, there's a lot of countries and different capabilities within those countries. So I think each activity is going to be dependent upon what the scenario is. There are a lot of non-government organizations that roll in immediately to start providing support. So you have all the non-governmental agencies, American Red Cross, Red Crescent, and others who are going to be on the ground providing that support. What was the second part of that?
The second part of it was how do these activities relate to other concerns at PACOM?
Other concerns in PACOM. We have quite a few concerns in PACOM. You know, it's an area that's very uncertain. You know, you can just turn on the news and, you know, look at what's going on in North Korea. You know, there's a lot going on in the world in the different geographic combatant commands. So in PACOM, you know, we're so large that we have so many areas that we have to cover, you know, whether it's a natural disaster or some other non-natural disaster activities. You know, we just have to be prepared to support those, and that's going to be, of course, a PACOM commander decision on where the warfighter support is directed.
Thank you. Here's another question from the audience, and I can ask any of you to respond. What can we do better to better predict or react to disasters? Do we need more satellite systems and more data or better applications for the data we already have? Anybody? Jeff?
I can take that. We're doing a lot of work in predictive analytics. And that there's a lot that can be determined by understanding the terrain, understanding the history, understanding weather patterns that can be done not to predict all disasters, but certain types of disasters, whether it's flooding, fires, are not completely predictable, but certainly can be anticipated, and we can do a better job of preparing as well.
I could maybe just
yes,
say, I mean,
Matt.
you know, I think there's a role of preparation here. I don't know about, obviously we need more satellite systems, of course, but I think what we really need is people to be prepared with the tools that they have today. So, you know, we have something every year called Test Your Satellite Phone Week, kind of like change your batteries in your smoke detector. The problem we find is these disasters occur and no one's charged up their devices. They've never used them. They take them out of the box literally and think that they're supposed to work. They don't know how to dial them. They don't, you know, increasingly the solutions are getting, you know, more sophisticated. It's true that you can probably set them up, but to even wonder if you know how to do that, it's best.
Wasn't that a big issue in Katrina?
Absolutely. I mean, there was just so much that people didn't know, and they thought that they were ready, and they really weren't. So I think to the extent that we can do more training and prepare people and have pre-positioning of assets in the right places, to the extent we understand it's going to happen, I think that's all going to help a lot.
Thank you. Bill, did you want to respond to that?
I would say we have been getting involved with some of our users in terms of early deployment or forward deployment of our terminals and that sort of thing. In particular, working with the American Red Cross, it's incredibly impressive how much planning work they do and the training that they do in preparedness, and especially with weather situations like in the Florida coast during the hurricane seasons and stuff. They do an awful lot of work. So we're learning through that activity, trying to figure out how we can be better providers.
Thank you.
I'd like to respond to
yes,
that as well.
Sure.
Sure, not so much from the predict standpoint, but from the reaction standpoint. In PACOM, one of the things we do annually is we hold something called Pacific Endeavor. It's a workshop organized under our Multinational Communications Interoperability Program, MCIP. And I participated in Pacific Endeavor 12, which was held in Singapore. We had delegates from 22 nations attend, all their militaries, and we had a subset workshop within it called Satcom Endeavor. And one of the things that we did was we held ViaSat training, and it was actual computer-based training for the different countries. And I actually went through the training myself, and so you go through all the training. It was very detailed. And then you actually go outside to a ViaSat terminal and get hands-on installing it, actual orientation to the satellite. I mean, it was the entire certification package, which I got certified as a ViaSat installer, kind of scary. But several of the nations were certified as well. So from an education standpoint, that's really the key in a lot of the developing nations, is educating them, training them, making them aware of different resources that are available, and then also how to fend for themselves when a disaster happens, where they can become the first responders, you know, while they're waiting for others to roll in.
Do you anticipate that kind of training to continue on a regular basis?
It is. So this year for Pacific Endeavor 13, it's going to be in Thailand. Instead of doing a Satcom Endeavor, they're doing a radio Endeavor. So this year they're looking at more of the point-to-point radio comms. And then in PE 14, they're looking at bringing back Satcom Endeavor.
Thank you. Bill, how have high-throughput satellites changed the emergency communications response systems, both domestically and globally?
Yeah, so I think high throughput is definitely a game changer in this market, and we've been able to show that by resupplying users with equipment and the bandwidth for less than just a renewal service on their previous systems. So the economics are great for them. Along with that goes the portability, the mobility of the systems. We're designing them to be more user-friendly, where the terminal actually tells you how to set it up. Those kinds of innovations, I think, are making it a lot easier for responders with less training to get online and get online quickly. We can establish our positions at forward posts closer to the events and move them around. It turned out in the aftermath of Sandy, they were moving their equipment multiple times a week. And so being highly portable and being able to break down and set up within a matter of hours was very important. So all of those innovations are coming to play with high capacity. And
weren't available before?
Not in, you know, when you're trying to work with 2.4 meter dishes and so on, it's a lot more difficult.
Sure. Here's another question from the audience. What is the role of cooperation between companies and the government, and internationally in using space assets in disaster situations? What works well now and what could be improved? Matt?
Well, you know, a lot of that cooperation occurs on the ground, and so sometimes people who are on the front lines serve multiple solutions, and so they sort of do the coordination up front. And obviously I think everybody usually drops whatever they're doing during a natural disaster and wants to help if possible. But I do remember a story during Haiti. I got a call from a friend who owns one of the, he was a friend because I sold him equipment many years ago into Haiti to run a ground wireless system, and he wanted a donation from me. And I said, you do remember I'm at Iridium now? And he said, oh my God, I need 30 phones. My guys don't know where the fuel trucks are. And I made sure he paid for them. But that's one where cooperation, I mean, you really, I think there's always unprecedented try to help during these emergencies. And I think we pull out all the stops.
Does anyone else want to respond to that question about cooperation between companies and government?
Well, there's a lot of cooperation. First of all, as we're talking about before, people want to help. There's a natural drive to help, and so a lot of the walls come down as companies and individuals strive to figure out how to collaborate. Now, the challenge is in major disasters, we can easily start to fall all over each other. And that's where agencies, military, PACOM in the case of your responses, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency when it comes to mapping data, Earth observation, play a key role in coordinating assets and the commercial players in the response. And I think together we've been able to really improve disaster response in recent years.
Do you think, Jeff, that satellite imagery is being used effectively in disasters?
I do. I think it's being used increasingly effectively. The shareability is allowing the imagery to get to wherever it needs to go, regardless of clearance, regardless of device, regardless of network. I think what needs to happen now is just more awareness. More awareness, for example, anyone with a .mil or .gov URL can get access to this imagery, unclassified imagery, through NGA. Or if they need help, they can contact us directly and we can get them to the appropriate place where they can get that imagery. By knowing where it is and how to access it, we're prepared to Matt's point. It's important to be prepared in advance and know all the resources out there, and I think we're making huge strides.
Major Bozada, have you been involved in the use of imagery in your disaster management?
I have not, but I can see the relevance in utilizing it. I've seen the images from, back then it was GOI's slider, of the before pictures of Japan and then the after pictures. But of course, imagery is important because it's kind of like getting a battlefield assessment of what the damage is, so that you know where you need to put your efforts, what needs to be done in order to make things more operational. For example, like the Sunday airport, all those vehicles and airplanes that were just, totally smashed up, and it took a lot of effort to get that back up. And I think they were back up within a matter of days. So that was very motivational to the Japanese, of course, with their help as well.
By the way, Susan, just going back to
sure,
areas of cooperation, it's obvious DoD often and commercial interests cooperate very well and need to, and first responders do too. But one area, those of us who are in the communication side of the business, and a shout out to the FCC, I found them to be extremely responsive. I mean, when Japan happened, literally we had authorization to use more spectrum in a matter of 30 minutes, and that doesn't happen in government very quickly often. I know that surprises a lot of people here, but in areas of like this, it really, but it takes some preparation. I guess if there's anything about that is just make sure if there's something that would help, go into these agencies and tell them what you could need in that kind of time frame, and ensure they recognize the value, so you're not going through a whole explanation and presentation when the the cards are on the table.
Here's a question that is clearly directed at Jeff and Matt. Any chance we'll see DigitalGlobe imagery distributed on Iridium phones?
We'll have to talk later.
Let's talk, yeah.
You want to talk about it now?
I'm all up for it.
Okay. Let's go to another question here. What innovations have you developed recently that can substantially improve the domestic and global response to disasters and humanitarian crises?
I'll take it, and I know we were being lighthearted about the last question, but really it is about data these days, and so frankly, it's not a bad idea to distribute, imagery or any other kinds of critical information. So that's not that surprising. And I mean, right now, I know people think of us as a satellite phone that works anywhere, but these days, the real focus is on trying to make the satellite kind of disappear. In other words, what people really want to use is their smartphones and the data devices, the laptops, the iPads, and that sort of thing. So, the innovations these days are to try to make it so that you don't see the satellite anymore. It just works. It works like they're used to working. We're trying to take that push-to-talk capability and integrating it into public networks. And again, not just so that if you're out of coverage of a landline push-to-talk P25 standard-based public safety system, but it isn't, the dispatcher doesn't need to dispatch to a satellite device versus a terrestrial device. It just works. It's just, it configures itself. So, the innovation is taking all the hard stuff away in some ways, and I think that's where a lot of this is going.
Bill, clearly ViaSat's
high-throughput satellites are innovations in and of themselves.
Well, certainly. I mean, we consider it a game changer for many of these applications. And the notion where you can take a small flyaway terminal that's basically a single case that's airport checkable and pair that with these portable base stations. So you can essentially take a cell tower anywhere in the world and set it up and get back to the network. So we've been doing that now for the last year with the Exceed service. And I think the notion of offering the mobility and the low cost and speed is really a significant change to the way these systems are going to be used.
Jeff, do you want to respond on the basis of imagery and innovation?
Happy to. I touched on two areas where there's a lot of innovation going on right now, crowdsourcing and predictive analytics, which are related. In terms of the imagery itself, our WorldView 2 satellite has 8-band capability, which allows more rapid analysis of what's going on the ground. And WorldView 3 will have shortwave infrared, which for disaster response is very significant because amongst its uses, it enables penetration of smoke and haze, which can be critical in response to fires, for example.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about congestion. It has occurred in the midst of a disaster in Haiti, I believe, for example, that certain satellite services that were being used by public safety and humanitarian organizations successfully became interoperable when the TV news really kind of took over. And the fact is that the media has more money to pay for services than humanitarian organizations and first responders. Is congestion a serious issue? Is there enough bandwidth? Can you get more? How do we deal with this? Matt, do you want to respond?
Well, I mean, I think it's a public policy issue more than I think it's a technical issue. There is a lot of spectrum and there's a lot of capacity and there's a lot more going in all the time. I'm a little worried if we're asking sort of the operators to kind of pick who should get the bandwidth. I really think that there are solutions to that. I think they're kind of public policy solutions. I think we'd all be glad to participate in those things. I mean, it is a concern. We've seen it before. Things like the FCC allowing more spectrum, that's helpful. Other solutions can help, but I'm really afraid of, picking one over the other and saying that, that somebody is really more important than others. That's why I think people want to build their own system sometimes.
Bill, I imagine the availability of a lot of capacity on the high-throughput satellites is one way to deal with.
That's one way to deal with it. It makes it part of a multi-faceted network. And to your earlier point, I mean, congestion is a fact, even in non-disaster events, as I was mentioning earlier with the G8 summit. So you can't always rely on the systems, even the terrestrial systems that you have. And the notion of a lot of it is about the network and how you design the network so that it has the throttles that you need in order to make sure that the high priority capacity is available for the users.
And then there's the issue of maybe no coverage of an area. Major Bozada, I think you've dealt with this in the Pacific. Can you address that?
Sure.
That issue?
Yep. In 2009, when the tsunami hit the American Samoa Islands, the Hawaii Air National Guard was set to deploy with their terminals, and what we found was we didn't have beam coverage over the island and also over a U.S. gateway. So a lot of times there may be a satellite in the area with coverage, but it takes coordination to get beams moved in order to provide that coverage.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions here about workforce and skills. What skills do you want to see in the future workforce to best meet needs in preparedness? And I know that you talked about training programs, Major Bozada. Do you have any response to this question?
I just think across the board, not just from our foreign partners, but also within our own government, our own military, is educating our leadership A lot of times they think that the Satcom's just going to be there and not understanding what's behind it. And a lot of times, you talked about congestion. It's not just congestion on the networks. I'll take it to a little different level. It could be congestion of beams or limitation of the number of beams coming off of a satellite, and you don't have all the coverage areas that you need to support all of your operations. So education, I think, not only from a technical standpoint, but from a leadership standpoint as well. And it's our job to educate our leaders to bring that so what factor and what it means to the operational mission.
Thank you. We're talking about satellite communications here. This is a question from the audience, which says the Department of Homeland Security seems to focus on terrestrial issues. How can we raise awareness at DHS about satellite capabilities, particularly when they have many different focus areas? Anyone want to respond to that?
I can say that we are working with DHS. They have employed a number of our systems, and they're evaluating them. It's a long evaluation process, as it turns out, but they are looking at that, especially on the borders and areas where they don't have a strong terrestrial capability. So I think they are looking at multiple solutions for their issues.
Matt?
One of the challenges, our terrestrial brethren are a lot bigger than we are, and they have a lot more lobbyists and a lot more discussion. And frankly, there's a lot more effort goes into it because you know, the terrestrial systems do stay up a lot of the times, not all the times, but they're very, very critical in emergencies. So I think it's a never-ending task that we all have to take on. You know, you got to plan ahead. This isn't something that just sort of magically comes to pass. And I think it's just you got to be relentless as an industry to remind every agency over and over again that there's got to be a solution there that they got to plan into.
This is another question from the audience. The term first responder typically applies to initial response, under 10 minutes. What sort of satellite communication capabilities exist in regions now, and realistically, how long before these alternative comms are actually deployed and in the hands of police, fire, et.cetera? Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I mean, we're in a lot of places in the first 10 minutes, literally, because, as I said, in the trunks of a lot of police cars or in fire stations, there's many of them have Iridium phones. We're now in, you know, you go around New York, all the financial institutions have Iridium backup devices. Some of them have it actually attached to their PBX systems. Don't work very often, but at least they can get lines during an emergency. A lot of banks do that. A lot of executives now are carrying them in as something as a backup for emergency. So, you know, I think that first 10 minutes is important, but there are many other things that can be used in that time too.
So an example I could cite is the news gathering. As I mentioned earlier, we're rather surprised by the uptake, I think, from the news industry on that. They have typically used the larger satellite trucks. The high-capacity systems allow them to get to these sites much quicker, and they're very forward-thinking in the way they're deploying them. So they are getting out there as the events are occurring.
Okay, and another question from the audience for all. How hardened are your satellites against extreme solar storms?
In our case, we're actually fairly immune because we're in such low Earth orbit that solar storms actually protect our satellites more than they do. So we don't worry about it too much. It's more of a geostationary problem.
Bill?
So our systems are, they use the typical shielding and hardened electronics that have been used in the industry for years now. So we're compatible, I would think, with any commercial systems that are designed for that purpose.
Jeff?
We're in a low Earth orbit, and I'm not going to respond beyond that. Thanks.
Okay, okay. We've got just about 1 minute and 19 seconds left. So in that time, I'd like to ask each of you to tell us what measures, we've touched on this a bit, but what measures can you take to mitigate against disasters in the future? Jeff?
Be prepared. Predictive analytics, be aware of what the resources are that are out there. There are a lot of resources, and knowing where they are in advance.
Thank you. Major Bozada?
Yeah, I've kind of touched on it already with our Pacific Endeavor and our MSIP program within PACOM. You know, continually developing, you know, the knowledge, skills, and abilities of other nations is going to be important in terms of responding to natural disasters.
Matt?
I agree with Jeff. Preparation, just being prepared, knowing that there's a lot of solutions that probably people don't even realize are available to them at a cost that's far below what they were expecting, and it's cheap insurance when you really come down to it when a disaster hits.
Thank you. Bill?
In our case, we're working with our first responders, firefighters, the Red Cross, and other relief agencies, and trying to understand their situation, provide the user-friendly tools that they need to accomplish their mission.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all, and please join me in thanking our panelists, Jeff Tarr, Major Linda Bozada, Matt Desch, and Bill Connelly. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Susan, and all of our panelists.